Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of July of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first I would like to discuss with you not the situation in Kharkiv, where the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, or in the western part of Avdiivka, or about the results of the NATO summit in Washington. Today I would like to discuss with you one important topic, probably the most important topic these days. It's not, once again, the progress on the ground, it's not the situation with another military package or another conversation or talks or rumors about whether the Western countries or United Kingdom allow the Ukrainians to use their weapon to attack the territory of Russia. We're going to talk about more simple thing, but telling the truth, we're going to talk about very simple things, but they are the most important things, at least in this stage of the special military operation. And according to some sources, according to some military experts, this stage of the special military operation is the final one. We don't know for sure how long this final stage of the special military operation is going to take place, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 10 years. Nobody knows for sure, but everybody understands this. Everybody have a feeling inside of their breast that this is the final stage of the special military operation. And this is the problem. This is the biggest problem. At least the Ukrainians is the first side of the conflict who faced this problem. Today, the forces of 79th Brigade, the sources from the forces of 79th Brigade, in their official Telegram channel, published very interesting article. They're saying the author of 79th Brigade stated that political games are very disturbing. Because we understand that everybody follows the same Telegram channels, but with different interests. One are following the channel to understand the losses, other are following the channel to understand whether Ukrainians or the Russians managed to repel or to advance in this or that direction. And there was an illness among the soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, that there would be peace negotiations. Just take a look at this sentence. This is his description of the soldier from 79th Brigade about the current situation among the personnel, among the brotherhood of his small group or squad or platoon or brigade. There was an illness. It's an illness among the soldiers that there would be peace negotiations, that by the end of the year everything would be over. Currently, this is probably one of the most important updates for the previous 24 hours, because you know that this is the beginning of defeat. But, you know, defeat started not at the moment when this or that army managed to destroy the army of the opponent. The defeat starts not with a new technology or new weapon that opposite side start using in the special or in any war, in any operation, military operation. Defeat always begins from your own head, from a head of every single soldier. If, let's say, army is 100%, and if 20% of soldiers decided already in their brains and their mental that they are already defeated, then it's still okay, because the rest 80% can control the situation, can lead the army, can counterattack, can break the situation, and can heal this illness, this mental illness. But when talking about 60% who has already this mental illness of defeat, then probably the entire army was already defeated. So this is the current situation among the Ukrainians. They talk with each other, and they see that every single Ukrainian right now, due to the negotiations in the United States of America, due to the NATO summit, due to Zelensky peace summit in the Switzerland, and the preparation before the next summit that nobody knows when exactly is going to happen, due to the words of Putin and Xi Jinping that the negotiations most likely are going to start somewhere in the end of this year, right after the elections in the United States of America, and now every single Ukrainian soldier is just talking about the things. But all these conversations, this illness, this peace negotiation illness, has a very negative consequences, first of all for the Ukrainian army, and the consequences is full-scale offensive in negative direction. during the previous few weeks, we faced significant number of reports and updates about significant Russian progress along the line of combat contact. This is, for example, one of the examples. Krasnogorovka, the biggest and the most powerful stronghold since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine at all. This stronghold has been built since 2014. For example, Krasnogorovka is bigger or stronger stronghold than, let's say, Bakhmut or Chasiv Yar or Avdiivka. But this stronghold was captured or are about to be captured by the Russians much faster than any other stronghold during the special military operation. And just I would like to point your attention that in the beginning, when the Russians were fighting for Mariupol, that was completely encircled and surrounded by the Russians, they spent a lot of time. The special military operation started in February, March, April, May. Just in 4 months, the Russians captured, completely encircled. It was a cauldron. The battle for Bakhmut took around 8 months. The battle for Avdiivka took probably a little bit less, maybe 5 or 6 months. The battle for Krasnogorovka took probably 2 or 3 months. And this is not because the Ukrainians forgot how to fight. This is not because the Ukrainians has less qualified armored vehicles, less qualified soldiers or something like this. All these things happens because everybody understands more and more that negotiations are going to start very soon. And the main problem is that now the Ukrainians are doing mobilization not among highly motivated people. They're mobilized people forcefully. And yesterday you was in your bed with your family, with your kids, and months ago, and now you're on the line of combat contact, and somebody you don't even know him, you haven't seen his face, are sending you to start attack and assault operation on another Russian position. That everybody understands that this is one-way ticket. And all these things force you to think that it's better to start negotiations. It's better to start negotiations. And now, as I understand, according to mobilization, according to Ukrainian losses, most likely 60 or 70% of Ukrainian personal soldiers are willing to begin negotiations and are willing to stop this war and to force Zelensky to do this. And the funniest and the most interesting thing that currently everybody for peace negotiations, when talking about Ukrainian, as we discussed, they're following the same Telegram channels, they're following the same Twitter, X channels, Facebook, and different social networks, and everybody understands that everybody in the world wants to start negotiations. The Russians, of course, want to start negotiations in their favor. Everybody understands this, but even the Russians wants to start negotiations. China wants, United States of America wants, European Union, everybody wants, and there is just one person in the world who doesn't want to start negotiations, and we're talking about Zelensky. He wants to continue dreaming about some Ukraine formula, about the borders of 1991, but obviously there is like the reality and wishful thinking. And as I understand, most of the Ukrainians, for the previous 3 years, found the solution, found the way how to split the wishful thinking and the reality. And the Ukrainians currently understand that most likely there are no chances for Ukraine to restore control over the borders of 1991. And of course, they can continue thinking that it's good to restore. And furthermore, this thing like wishful thinking about the borders of 1991 is a very good tool in the hands of neo-nationalists of Ukraine that can always blame Zelensky in his failure, that he promised one thing and he haven't managed to achieve anything what he promised. And they can always start and make military coup. And Zelensky, of course, is a normal people. He has the blood in his veins, and of course he's afraid for his own life, and most of all he's afraid for his family. For example, in this video we can see the results of clashes for the village by the name of Voshchod. Today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes the Russians managed to establish complete over this territory. We see the Russian soldiers who managed to raise the flag in the village and to clear this territory completely. Another village that Ukrainians lost almost without any resistance, not because they are very bad warriors or because the majority of the soldiers were recently mobilized. The thing is that why the Ukrainians abandoned this village is that they think this illness, peace negotiation illness, tell them that soon there are going to be negotiations. So why do you need to die in the clashes with Russians if in a month there are going to be peace? You think it's worth it to die today somewhere in the vicinity of Novoselovka Pershe if your, let's say, life doesn't matter anything, and in a month they're going to be peace, and nobody will even remember you. Nobody will even pay your sister, your mother, your kids any money, because Ukraine will finish the special military operation with significant debts, and they will be forced to pay them, and they will be paid them from your money, from money of your relatives, your friends, and so on. So that's why the Ukrainians decide that what is the reason to protect these villages, these no-names villages? It's better to fall back. It's better to save your life, because very soon, in a month, in 3 months, the peace negotiations are going to start. And of course, the Russians are using this situation. They continue moving, they continue capturing more and more territories. For example, Minister of Defense report about complete control over Voshchod, and as you can see, we have adjusted the map. But pro-Ukrainian mappers are saying that the Russians managed to move even further in the western direction and to capture Yevgeniivka. And of course, it's pro-Ukrainian sources. Let's say very small updates, very small progress in comparison with the report of the Russian sources, who stated that the Russians managed to establish complete control over Yevgeniivka. Yevgeniivka is a very long village. Yevgeniivka starts somewhere in the north, to the north from Sokol, and Yevgeniivka ends in the intersection of Balka, Samoilova, and River Vovcha. So this is the final street, the final block of buildings of this village, and the Russians are saying that they managed to establish complete control over the entire village, but not just over some part. And this is obviously significant progress from the Russian side. Now they reach the operational space. It's not like operational space, telling the truth. There's like, this space is limited with different water barriers, but the thing is that the Russians now can attack in many directions, including the village of Progress and Vovcha, and most likely this is exactly the next target of the Russians in the northwestern direction. And of course, the Russians are about to begin the final battle for Novosilovka-Persha, for this territory, which will also be abandoned by the Ukrainians. And the reason of this is that soon there are going to be peace negotiations. There is no need to stay there under Russian fire, artillery fire. It's better to save my own life. It's better to stick as close as possible to the main supply roads. It's better not to follow the orders of commanders, because they are never here. They never come. They can't come here and to punish you, because they're very far from this territory. And I have my friends, I have my brothers in the hood, let's say brother in arms. So we can always discuss everything. We can negotiate, and we can decide not to follow any order and to do whatever we like. And this is exactly what is happening in many directions, not just in Novosilovka-Persha, but everywhere. Now let's move to New York. And the thing is that what did happen in New York? What was the reason why the Russians managed to establish significant control in the southern part, in the central part of the stronghold? The reason is that probably the same. The Ukrainians don't want to fight. They understand that soon the negotiations are going to start. And of course, the Russians are using this in their favor. And you know that there are always lots of arguments that improves this soldier's logic. Because, for example, if you have some doubts, maybe it's just rumors, maybe it's just a tricky thing from the Russian side to force us to fall back, to surrender. But every time the Ukrainians see another FAB 3000 or another FAB of 1500, they understand that probably they are thinking in a correct way. Maybe it's not so important to fight for all these no-names and for all these no-name towns and settlements all over the line of combat contact. Furthermore, the Russians are not like taking the entire Ukraine under control. The Russians are not playing to make Ukraine a part of Russia. They just want to take LPR, DPR, maybe some territories that they haven't managed to capture. But all in all, it's not the entire Ukraine. And all these things, all these talks are always and always between irregular Ukrainians who are on the line of combat contact, who receive every single day these applications that the Russians drop on them on their heads with drones, suggesting them to surrender. They see a lot of videos how the Russians capture them, how they bring them to prisons, how they feed them. And the most important, of course, they talk with Ukrainians who are returning back from the prisoners, from the Russian, let's say, prison, and something like this. The Russians continue advancing in New York, as you can see. The Russians managed to improve their positions in the southwestern direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions along Ivano-Franka streets further in the central part. And the most important, that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over a small industrial zone in the central part of New York. And currently the distance between the Russians and the heart of New York is less than 500 meters. So this report we got yesterday in the evening. So most likely the Russians either have already entered the industrial zone or about to do this, because once again the Ukrainians don't think that it's worth their lives, because anyway sooner or later the negotiation process is going to start. So maybe it's better not to fight for another square kilometer, but it's better to fight for another 100 lives of stormtroopers that can be saved and sent back home to their relatives, wives and their kids. Maybe this is better solution than to fight. Who knows? But once again, according to the forces of 79th Brigade, most of Ukrainians, lots of Ukrainian soldiers right now think that it's better to save lives than to save another no-name square kilometer somewhere in the vicinity of New York or Donetsk. It's New York. So why the United States of America are not fighting for their own town? Maybe sometimes they're joking between each other in the trenches somewhere in the vicinity of Chasov Yar. As for Pivnichne, as for Donetsk agglomeration, there are still very heavy clashes. The Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in the stronghold. As for this direction, we can make a conclusion that the Russians were slowed down a little bit. Maybe because highly motivated forces of 32nd, 95th and Lut Assault Brigade were sent here for the stabilization of the territory, and most likely they managed to stabilize. And currently the clashes in this area reminds us the situation that we saw in Vovchansk probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, when the Russians reached the citadel in the central part, and as a result of that block they were stopped completely, and until the Russians reduced to ruins or found another solution, there were almost no activity, no progress on the ground from both sides. Now let's move to Razdolovka direction, to Siversk more precisely. We got geolocation confirming Russian presence in the northern part, northeastern part of Razdolovka, and based on the geolocation we have adjusted the map and colored these fields under the control of Russian Federation. For now we still have some doubts about this territory, mainly we don't have any geolocations, but telling the truth, I think that these fields are also were captured by the Russians probably maybe a few weeks ago, when the post that was published by Deep State we saw in the open source. As for Siversk itself, the Russians are bombing this town heavily. And this is not the first video. Since the beginning of May, the Russians are very focused in this direction. Of course, the Russians are using this, the benefits of this mental illness about the peace negotiation that are going to start very soon. They're using this. They're trying to, let's say, to turn this mental disease into square kilometers of additional progress. And as we can see, the Russians are doing well this job, and the Russians are focused on Siversk much, because Siversk is very important settlement and town before the Battle for Slaviansk. Maybe soon the Ukrainians will find a cure how to heal their soldiers from this illness of peace negotiation, but it might be very late. Sometimes, very often, it's become very late. So you find the cure for this that disease, but you don't have time for this already to save the situation. So maybe something like this is going to happen in Ukraine as well. As for Makiivka, today the sources reported that the Russians entered the village from the southeast and the Russians entered the same village from the northeast. There are very heavy clashes inside of the village, but mainly this is clearing operation when the Russians are moving from one building to another, trying to find the abandoned Ukrainians or those Ukrainians who refused to retreat from the village with the main forces, trying and hoping that he would be captured by the Russians and that the Russians would show some mercy to them and they will not do anything bad with them. As for the northern Kupiansk direction, the Russians continue controlling the main supply road from the north to the south and from the south to the north, keeping this triangle completely secured from any reinforcements and reserve from the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainians suffer significant problems in this area. Maybe 1, 2 2, 3 or days, or maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and the Russians will renew their full-scale offensive with the purpose to reach the Oskol River. And this is very important because as soon as the Russians reach Oskol River, this is not just like strategical win, this is also another mental attack and another argument for the Ukrainians that maybe the negotiations are going to start very soon. So maybe there is no need if we lost already the Oskol River, so maybe it's the time to do this. So this is probably the things that we're going to start facing very soon. As for Vovchansk direction, as we discussed in the previous updates, the Russians achieved significant results and significant progress in this area. According to information we have, the Russians crossed Vovcha River, at least in many directions. For now, we don't have any geolocations confirming this, but more and more reliable sources are talking about this. According to, for example, Syriac, the Russians managed to cross Vovcha River and to gain a foothold in the vicinity of the cemetery and some buildings along the Ivano-Franko Street, Peluzhna Street. According to information we have, currently the Russians are storming the railway station along the railways or something like this, and we have 100% confirmation that the Russians began forcing the Ukrainians to make the smart decisions very fast. Today we got a report that the Russians were attacking this territory, and as a result of this attack they captured additional positions of armed forces of Ukraine and cleared some trenches. Furthermore, we got reports that under very heavy pressure and due to the Russian foothold in the southern part of the aggregate industrial zone, the Ukrainians decided to save the personnel and they start abandoning their position from the northern part as well. And that it's always very good not to be encircled because the negotiations are going to start very soon. I think that for some Ukrainians sometimes it's not very good to finish the war as a prisoner of war. It's always good to let's say to finish and to reach the negotiation process as a member of Ukrainian army, but not as a member of prisoner of war. So this is also always a very good argument to abandon additional square kilometers in Russian favor. And maybe this is exactly the thing that happened as for the northern part of Vovchansk. As for Gluboka, there are still very heavy clashes, but now from the Russian side, the Russians managed to stabilize the situation. Maybe this stabilization is connected with the situation with the NATO summit, because the summit is about to be finished, and now the Ukrainians realize that there is no need to send more forces to attack because the losses are very heavy, and they stopped in the farms, and now the Russians began clearing the farms with the purpose to restore control over the lost territories. So this is the situation. As you can see, everything is very complicated, everything is very difficult, and now the Ukrainians are on the position where they need to decide to fight till the end, or to surrender and to start the preparation before negotiation process. But according to picture we see, probably there is just one Ukrainian in the world who wants to continue the war and the special military operation, and we are talking about Zelensky. But telling the truth, something tells me that he is willing to continue special military operation, not because he is willing to restore the borders of Ukraine till 1991, but probably he don't want to lose his president chair. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.